Welcome back to part two on this PowerPoint looking at the stock market. So uh, you're going to be use you are going to be looking at a specific company that you choose in a worksheet. This next section will help you um, on that worksheet and will just help you in general understand how people look at stocks. So a couple of quick vocabulary words first. Um, so this word ticker is a noun. Ticker is the symbols that a particular company in the stock market uses. So, for example, the Walt Disney Company, its ticker is DIS. Or if we're going to look at Walmart, Walmart's ticker is WMT. Next, this word sector. Sector is a noun. It is the area a company works in. So, for example, Netflix is actually their sector is called communication services, and their industry is entertainment. Okay, moving on. Uh, a There are certain measures of a company that is commonly used. One thing is called market capitalization. That is a noun, and that is basically how much the company is worth in total. Or another way of thinking about it is how much money would you have to use in order to buy 100% ownership of the company? If that market capitalization um, is over 200 billion, we call that a mega size company. Company size is basically based on market capitalization. If the market capitalization is between 10 and 200 billion, it's large. Between 2 billion and 10 billion, it's mid. Small is anything between 300 million and 2 billion. And if it is smaller than that, it is called a micro company. Okay. Other ways, other measures of a company that we use. So usually the first question I get asked when I end up talking about companies and stock market is how do you know when it is good to buy a company's stock? So the next about 5 or 6 slides, we'll be talking about ways that people use to value a company to see whether or not um, to value a company and value its shares to see whether or not it is a good or bad time to buy a particular stock. Uh, just a record, these are the ones I'm going to talk about are just two that are used, but there are lots of different measures, and none of them are foolproof. None of them will be able to tell you 100% whether it's a good or bad idea to buy a particular stock. Okay, but that being said, let's talk about something called the PE ratio. The PE ratio basically is the price of its shares divided by how much the company earns in profit per share. Um, or another way of thinking about this is how much money you would have to pay in order to buy $1 worth of the company's earnings. There are two different types of PE ratios. There is the trailing PE ratio and the forward PE ratio. The trailing here means the past, forward means looking into the future. So the way you calculate the trailing PE ratio is you get the current price um, per share for a particular company and then divided by how much in the past, let's say 12 months, they've earned for each share. The forward PE ratio is similar. You take the current price of their shares, but then you divide by how much you expect them to make in a year in the future. Or maybe you might take the next 5 years going forwards average. Um, so the forward PE ratio is the one you care about more because it is from future earnings that you're going to make profits. If they made a whole bunch of money last year, but you don't think they're going to make money next year, then maybe you shouldn't buy their stock because they can only pay you using future money. The problem, though, is that your future PE ratio, that's looking into the future, and so this number that you get from the forward PE ratio is only as good as the guess on how much money they're going to make in the future. Let's do an example. Okay, so let's say we have company Q. This is how much it costs one of their shares. And let's say that they made this much money last year. And this is how many total shares there are of this company. So first of all, you need to know two things. You need to know price per share and earnings per share. So what's their price per share? Well, right there, just $25. Okay, and to get their earning per share, all you have to do is divide how much they made last year by how many total shares. So $40 million, 20 million shares. When you divide that, you get $2. So they made $2 for each share. Okay, and since we are looking at how much they made last year, this is talking about trailing PE, because this is looking into the past. This number everyone will always agree on because it's looking in the past. That data does not change. Forward PE, you will have different people thinking it is a different number depending on which guess they use for future earnings. So here, once again, trailing PE is dividing the current price divided by how much they made per share over the last year. So trailing PE of 12.5 for company Q. Okay. One of the things you're going to be asked to do in that worksheet is to find the average PE for the S&P 500. And this is the average historical PE. So we're not talking about the PE right now. We're talking about over the past blank number of years. What has been the PE for the S&P 500? Is a 12.5 PE, is that expensive? Is it cheap? And that's why you want to look at what is that 12.5 compared to what it is in general when you look at stock market over a long period of time. Another very popular way to figure out whether or not you should buy a company or buy shares of a company is something called the PEG ratio. And the PEG ratio basically takes your PE ratio and divide it by the percent growth. So once again, for this, you can have a trailing or forward PE. You can have a PE using past information, or you can have a PEG using past information, or you can have a PEG using your best guess on what's going to happen in the future. In order to calculate the PEG, what you do is you divide the PE ratio divided by the percent growth. And if you're looking at trailing PEG, then you do percent growth over last year. If you're doing forward PEG, then you do percent growth that you expect in the future. And once again, just like forward PE, forward PEG, how good that number you get only depends on how good your guess is for what's going to happen in the future. And let's do an example for that one. So here's an example for PEG. Once again, we're using that same company Q. And so let's say that we look at last year, we said that they made $40 million. Let's say the year before that, so 2 years ago, they made $32 million. Okay, Since we're once again using past information, we're doing trailing PEG and trailing PE. So what is their trailing PE? Well, we calculated that already. It is 2.5. So now you just need to calculate their G, their trailing growth. So if they made $32 million 2 years ago, and then they made $40 million last year, that means they're growing. So the way you calculate that growth from 32 to 40, they grew 25%. The math is right here. So it is last year divided by 2 years ago, and then you minus 1. If you're doing this math in a calculator, you're going to get 0.25, and we convert that into percent. So 0.25 would be 25%. So now, in order to calculate the trailing PEG, you take their trailing PE, which is 12.5, and you divide it by their trailing growth, which is 25. So that would have a PEG of 0.5. So is that cheap or is that expensive? Well, the general rule that people use, and when I say general rule, this is what many people sort of just say, okay, we have to say there's an answer, this is what the answer is. But it isn't like everybody exactly follows this. This is just a general rule. So if a PEG of 1 is considered to be fairly priced, anything lower than that is considered to be underpriced. Anything more than that is considered overpriced. So even though this is a company that has a PE of 12.5, they're growing really fast. They're growing at a double of what sort of that number is. And if you have a fast growing company, that makes the PEG get smaller. The bigger the G is, the smaller this is, since it is PE divided by G. So if you have a fast growing company, most people are willing to say, I'm going to pay more for this. Because if it's fast growing in the future, it should be making a lot more money. So this is how sort of the PEG takes into account how fast a company is growing, which the PE ratio does not. Okay, and so these are just two very common ones that are used. There are lots of different measures on whether or not it is a good or bad time to buy a particular shares in a particular company. Here's a bunch of different ones. Times revenue, earnings multiplier, discount cash flow, dividend discount model, price to book, price to cash flow, price to sales. These three down here is just something divided by something. That's what this word TU is talking about. So there are a lot of different ways to try to figure out whether or not it is a good or bad time to buy a particular share, whether a company is right now undervalued, overvalued, and these are just some of the way to do it. Quick disclaimer, none of this stuff is perfect, and you can always lose money, even if you've looked at every single one of these values, because something like Corona could happen and everyone stays home and no one goes and shop. All right, this is the end of part 2. Go on to part 3.